My dear friends, have you ever thought that a city by the lake, where mornings usually begin with traffic crawling along Lakeside Avenue, commuters clutching steaming cups of coffee as they hurry into gray concrete towers, could still hide secrets powerful enough to leave everyone stunned? Cleveland, long known for the quiet resilience of its working-class streets, the brooding presence of Lake Erie, and a life that seemed steady and ordinary. But then on a Monday morning in November, a shocking event unfolded. Right at the service ramp leading into the Justice Center complex, people witnessed a lone female detective stepping out to block an entire internal affairs convoy and delivering a warning that could change the fate of the entire city. Before we dive deeper together into this mysterious journey, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on Justice Voice and turn on the notification bell. That way, every thrilling and surprising story will always reach you first. Monday mornings in Cleveland usually began with a slow crawl of traffic along Lakeside Avenue, commuters hunched in their coats, paper cups steaming as they hurried into the concrete shadow of the Justice Center complex. But this morning carried a sound that bent the ordinary rhythm out of shape. At first, it was a faint tremor on the air, the low hum of sirens too distant to be urgent. Then the hum thickened, gathering strength, until the whole street seemed to vibrate with it. A convoy was coming. Heads turned. A city bus eased to the curb, passengers craning to see. At a cafe across from the courthouse, a cluster of retirees set down their mugs and peered through the fog glass. The sound drew closer, swelling into a braided chorus of wailing sirens and throbbing lights. The words stenciled on the lead vehicles soon became clear. Internal Affairs. Inside the front SUV, Captain Laura McKenna sat upright, eyes on the Justice Center's looming walls. Years of experience had etched calm into her face. She believed in schedules, checklists, procedures that held the chaos at bay. Today was meant to be routine. Arrive, split into teams, review records, file the report. Nothing more. But as the sirens bounced back from the buildings and rolled through the November drizzle, even McKenna felt the weight of unease pressing in. On the service ramp leading to the staff entrance, Detective Naomi Carter waited. She had been standing there long enough for her coffee to cool, long enough for the mist to cling damply to her coat. She wasn't tall, nor imposing in the usual way, but there was something in the way she planted her feet on the wet pavement that suggested she wouldn't move for anyone. Her badge rested in her pocket like a hidden anchor, and in another pocket, a small flash drive pressed against the lining a heavier burden than it looked. Naomi had thought of a dozen quieter ways to do this. She could have called McKenna. She could have scheduled a private meeting, presented her evidence inside a closed room, spared herself the risk of ridicule or worse. But some truths, she knew, had to be shouted into the open air, where the morning itself became a witness. And so she stood here, on the ramp where every officer would see her, waiting for the moment the convoy arrived. The memory of her mentor drifted through her like smoke. Sergeant Harold Boone, steady voice, patient hands, the man who had taught her how to read a crime scene as if it were a story whispered by the walls. 6 months ago, Boone had been killed in what the department called an accident. His car crumpled on a rain-slick highway. But Naomi had never believed it was chance. Every trail she had followed since seemed to wind back toward the same shadow. Deputy Chief Richard Coleman. A gust from Lake Erie whipped through the plaza, rattling the flags outside the courthouse. Naomi tightened her coat around her, eyes on the approaching headlights. Her heart hammered, but her expression stayed calm. She had spent weeks gathering what no one wanted to believe. Recordings, documents, whispers that pointed to an unholy pact between Coleman and a local crime figure, Vince Russo. She knew what was planned for today, the destruction of evidence, a staged explosion, lives put at risk to keep powerful men safe. The convoy slowed at the last intersection. Brakes hissed, engines idled. She could see the silhouettes inside, McKenna in the passenger seat, officers behind her ready with clipboards and pens. They expected another routine inspection. They did not know they were driving straight into a trap. Naomi stepped forward, one pace, then another, until she stood squarely in the path of the lead SUV. The drizzle slicked her hair against her forehead, blurred the edges of her figure in the flashing lights. A hush rippled across the street as passers-by realized what they were seeing, a lone detective, rooted to the asphalt, stopping a convoy with nothing but her stance. The driver braked hard. Tires squealed, sirens cut off. Doors flew open, officers spilling onto the wet pavement with irritation and confusion. McKenna herself emerged, eyes narrowing at the sight of Naomi blocking their way. Naomi drew a breath deep enough to steady the tremor in her chest. She did not reach for her weapon. She did not shout. She slipped her badge from her pocket, held it high where every eye could see, and said with a voice that carried over the wind and the engines, "If you take one more step without checking first, blood will be spilled inside that building today." The words struck like a hammer in the mist. Conversations on the sidewalk froze. The officers exchanged startled looks. McKenna's jaw tightened, but she raised her hand, signaling her team to hold. For a long moment, the morning seemed to balance on the edge of Naomi's warning. And there she stood, one figure against a convoy, the drizzle dripping from her coat, her eyes steady as steel. The Justice Center loomed behind her like a silent witness, its windows filled with the unaware lives she was determined to protect. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the patter of drizzle on windshields. Then the silence broke voices, clipped and impatient, as internal affairs officers clustered around their captain. The air smelled of wet asphalt and exhaust, but beneath it pulsed a sharper scent, the kind Naomi Carter had learned to recognize over years on the job, the raw tang of suspicion. Captain Laura McKenna stepped forward, her boots striking the pavement with the crisp authority of habit. She was taller than Naomi, broad-shouldered in her raincoat, and her eyes narrowed against the dim morning light. "Detective Carter," McKenna said, voice level but edged, "what exactly do you think you're doing?" Naomi held her ground. She raised her badge a little higher, the metal catching a glint of the convoy's fading lights. "Stopping you from walking into a trap." One of the younger inspectors barked a laugh, short and nervous. "A trap? What is this, Carter, some stunt?" But McKenna didn't laugh. She studied Naomi's face, reading the determination in every taut muscle, every deliberate breath. She'd been in the business long enough to know when a person was bluffing and when they were running on the thin ice of conviction. "Explain," McKenna said. Naomi reached inside her coat, slow and careful, and withdrew a thick envelope, its edges softened by weeks of handling. From another pocket, she pulled a small flash drive, its plastic casing dull with scratches. She stepped forward and placed both into McKenna's gloved hands. "You need to look at this before you go inside," Naomi said. "If you don't, you'll be giving Deputy Chief Coleman exactly what he wants, and you might not walk out again." The mention of Coleman's name drew a ripple through the gathered officers. He was no ordinary figure. He was a deputy chief with decades in the department, a man who shook hands with city councilmen and spoke at fundraisers. Accusing him of anything was like accusing the pillars of the courthouse itself. McKenna's expression hardened. "That's a serious charge, Detective." "I wouldn't be standing here if it weren't," Naomi replied. Her voice was quiet, but the words carried in the mist. McKenna gestured toward her tech officer. "Run the drive. Now." "Oh." They moved quickly, pulling a rugged laptop from the back of a vehicle, its screen glowing pale in the damp morning. Naomi felt her pulse in her throat. She had replayed this recording so many times in the solitude of her apartment that the voices were etched into her bones. Still, hearing it now, with witnesses, was like peeling the lid off a live grenade. The audio crackled, then settled. Coleman's voice filled the speakers, unmistakable in its gravelly cadence. "When Internal Affairs shows up, we're ready. We light it, we burn the archives. No records, no case. We walk clean." There was a murmur of agreement from another voice, a man Naomi recognized as Vince Russo, though she didn't name him yet. For a long moment after the playback ended, no one moved. The drizzle seemed to grow louder, a fine curtain over the stunned silence. The young inspector who had laughed before now looked pale, his eyes darting between Naomi and McKenna. That could be anyone," he muttered, but the tremor in his tone betrayed him. Naomi stepped closer, her voice gaining urgency. "It's him, and this isn't the first time he's buried the truth. 6 months ago, Sergeant Boone died in what they called an accident. His car went off the road outside Parma, but Boone had been digging into old missing persons files. He'd started asking questions about a girl named Lily Rhodes, gone since 2004. And the week before he died, he told me he thought the trail led back to Coleman." McKenna's eyes flickered. The name stirred memory. Lily Rhodes, a teenager whose disappearance had haunted Cleveland briefly before fading into the endless backlog of cold cases. McKenna herself had been a young lieutenant then, her plate overflowing with budget meetings and staff shortages. The case had slipped through the cracks. "Boone kept copies," Naomi pressed. "I found some of his notes after his death. They pointed to the archives in this building. That's what Coleman wants gone today. Not just financial records or disciplinary files, evidence that links him and Russo to something far darker. The drizzle beaded on McKenna's coat as she weighed the words. Around them, her team shifted uneasily, their eyes drawn again and again to the looming bulk of the Justice Center. Behind those glass walls, clerks, officers, and civilians moved through their routines, blissfully unaware that their building had been marked for destruction. Finally, McKenna spoke. "Carter, you've made accusations before. You remember what that cost you?" A sting flared in Naomi's chest. A year earlier, she had filed a complaint against another superior, certain she had uncovered misconduct. The investigation had gone nowhere, her evidence dismissed as circumstantial. The episode had left her reputation scarred, colleagues whispering that Naomi Carter was reckless, unstable, eager to see ghosts in every corner. "I remember," Naomi said softly, "and I won't pretend it didn't break me for a while. But this isn't the same. This is bigger. And if you ignore it, Captain, you'll be sending your own people into a coffin." The conviction in her voice was harder than steel. McKenna glanced at the flash drive again, at the envelope of documents heavy in her palm. She drew a slow breath. "Lieutenant Morales," she called, turning to the SWAT officer at her side. "Assemble your team, quietly. We're not stepping foot inside until we know exactly what we're walking into." A jolt ran through the group. Morales, a man with a boxer's build and steady eyes, gave a curt nod and moved to radio his unit. Around him, inspectors began exchanging nervous looks, realizing the day's routine had shattered in an instant. Naomi let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands trembled faintly at her sides. For a moment, she felt the weight of Boone's absence, the empty space where his steady voice should have been. But then she straightened her shoulders. His fight had become hers, and she wasn't backing away. McKenna turned back to her. "You'll be coming with us, Detective. If what you say is true, you're not just a witness. You're the reason we might have a chance to stop this." Naomi gave a single nod. Behind them, the Justice Center loomed in the mist, silent and vast, its walls concealing secrets that had waited years to be unearthed. And as the first SWAT van swung onto the plaza, its headlights cutting through the drizzle, Naomi felt the morning shift again, no longer holding its breath, but bracing for the storm that was about to break. The plaza outside the Justice Center shifted from routine bustle to something taut and watchful. Word spread quickly. SWAT was mobilizing. Vans rolled up, tires hissing on the wet pavement, headlights cutting long spears of light through the drizzle. Officers in black tactical gear spilled out, their movements brisk, practiced, heavy with intent. Civilians who had lingered to watch the convoy of internal affairs now found themselves ushered back by uniformed patrol, confusion, and curiosity buzzing in their whispers. Naomi Carter stood just beyond the line, her coat damp, her breath a visible rhythm in the cold air. She had been in raids before, had watched tactical teams stack along a wall, shields raised, rifles angled, but never had she been both part of the reason and the witness. The evidence she carried had set all this in motion, and with every passing second, the weight of that truth pressed harder against her ribs. Captain Laura McKenna conferred with Lieutenant Ethan Morales beside the hood of a cruiser. They bent over a hastily drawn map of the Justice Center's basement archive wing. Morales pointed with a gloved finger, outlining entrances and choke points. McKenna listened, her face grave. When she looked up, her gaze found Naomi. "Detective Carter," she called. Naomi crossed to them, her shoes clicking on the wet pavement. McKenna held her eyes. "You've given us evidence of intent, but I need specifics. If they've set charges, where would they plant them?" Naomi drew a slow breath. "The service corridor near the archive vault. It's narrow, out of sight. If Boone's notes were right, Coleman had Russo's men working maintenance contracts there last spring. They'd know every inch of it." Morales frowned. "We sweep that corridor first." McKenna gave a curt nod. "And Carter goes with you. She knows what we're looking for." The decision landed like a stone in Naomi's chest. She had expected to be sidelined, questioned, perhaps even dismissed. Instead, she was being pulled deeper into the storm. She straightened her shoulders. "Understood." Behind them, one of the younger inspectors muttered to another, just loud enough to carry. "She's the same Carter who cried wolf last year. Now she's leading a SWAT team into the archives? This is insane." Naomi caught the words but did not turn. Doubt was a constant companion. She had learned to live with it. McKenna, however, did turn. Her eyes were sharp as glass. "If you can't handle following orders, step off my team," she snapped. The inspector dropped his gaze, chastened. The tension was palpable now. The drizzle thickened, turning sidewalks slick, beating on the black armor of the SWAT officers. Radios crackled with updates from inside. Clerks being escorted out, floors cleared, doors locked down. The Justice Center, usually a hive of bureaucratic noise, was being methodically silenced, room by room, until only shadows and secrets remained. Naomi found herself walking beside Morales as they moved toward the staff entrance. He carried himself with the easy steadiness of a man who had lived in tense corridors before. "You sure about this, detective?" he asked, not unkindly. "As sure as I can be," she answered. "Boone died for chasing these threads. I'm not letting them burn with the evidence." Morales studied her a moment, then nodded. "Good enough for me." They entered the building in a column, boots echoing against the linoleum floors. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, cold and indifferent. Naomi's senses sharpened with each step. She could hear the squeak of damp soles, the jingle of gear, even the faint thrum of the city through the walls. At the stairwell leading down to the archives, Morales raised a fist. The team froze. He signaled two men forward. They descended first, rifles sweeping, eyes scanning every corner. Naomi's heart hammered. She had walked these stairs 100 times in daylight, carrying case files or escorting witnesses. Tonight, they felt like a descent into a crypt. At the bottom, the corridor stretched long and narrow, fluorescent bulbs flickering overhead. The air smelled of dust and disinfectant. Naomi pointed toward the service door Boone had marked in his notes. There, that's where they'd set it. The team moved, precise and silent. A tech officer knelt by the door, tools out. Seconds ticked like hammer blows. Then his breath caught. "Captain, we've got wires. Multiple." McKenna's voice crackled over the radio. "Confirm." "Confirmed," the tech replied. "This isn't a bluff." Naomi felt the cold lance through her veins. She had been right, but there was no victory in it, only the grim confirmation of how close they were to disaster. Morales barked orders. The corridor filled with focused energy, officers moving to secure the area, specialists unrolling kits. Naomi stepped back, giving them space, but her eyes never left the door. Boone had died chasing this trail. Lily Rhodes's file might be behind that very wall, and Coleman had been willing to kill them all to keep it buried. Above them, on the upper floors, Coleman himself stood in his office, phone pressed to his ear. Through the wide windows, he could see the flashing lights outside, the unusual stir in the plaza, his jaw clenched. On the other end of the line, Vince Russo's voice hissed with anger. "You said it would be clean, Richie. You said internal affairs would walk in, the records would burn, and we'd be sipping whiskey by noon." Coleman gripped the phone harder. "Something's changed. Someone tipped him. I'll handle it." But as he hung up, his gut twisted. There was only one person reckless enough to stand in his way: Naomi Carter. He moved quickly, calling in favors, summoning loyal officers still blind to the rot. If he could not erase the evidence, he could still erase her. Down in the basement, the bomb techs worked with swift precision. Naomi pressed against the wall, her mind racing. Every second they delayed, Coleman had time to maneuver. She could feel the clock ticking, loud as the sirens had been an hour ago. "Clear," the tech finally called, sweat streaking his temple. "We've disarmed the primary, but there may be more." Relief washed through the team, but it was thin, brittle. They all knew the danger wasn't over. Morales exhaled. "We keep moving. Carter, stay close." Naomi nodded, her jaw tight. She touched the pocket where the photograph of Lily Rhodes rested, folded and frayed. She thought of Boone, of the truth buried under years of silence. And she knew this was only the beginning, because somewhere above them, Richard Coleman had realized the tide was turning. And men like Coleman did not drown quietly. The air in the basement of the Justice Center was heavy with dust and silence. The disarmed wires still dangled from the service door like veins cut loose, a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything in a single spark. Naomi Carter stood a step back, her shoulders tense, the taste of adrenaline sharp at the back of her throat. Lieutenant Ethan Morales gave the signal, and two officers pushed open the door that had hidden the explosives. The hinges groaned. Beyond lay a narrow hallway lined with metal shelves, boxes stacked high, manila folders sagging with the weight of years. It was the archive vault, a place where the city's forgotten cases had been laid to rest. Naomi stepped in with cautious reverence. She had walked these rows before, filing reports, digging through dusty records for old investigations. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the room seemed alive with ghosts, each folder humming with secrets left to rot. "Carter," Morales said, keeping his voice low, "you said Boone's notes pointed here. Where do we start?" Naomi's eyes swept the shelves. Boone had written of a particular code, a misfiled box in the missing persons section. She ran her finger along the labels until she found the faded stamp. Rhodes Lily, 2004. Her throat tightened. She pulled the box down, the cardboard soft with age, and set it on a table. Dust puffed into the air. She flipped the lid and looked inside. The file was thinner than it should have been. A handful of photographs, a brief police report, and then silence. No follow-up interviews, no additional leads. As if the case had been closed before it had begun. Morales leaned over her shoulder. "That's it?" Naomi frowned. Number Boone said he found inconsistencies. He believed Coleman ordered this buried. She pulled out a photo, a teenage girl, brown hair caught by the wind, smiling at the camera. The edges were worn, as if handled too many times. Naomi's chest ached. Boone had shown her this photo once, told her the girl deserved better than to be forgotten. Beneath the folder was something else. Naomi lifted it carefully, a cassette tape in a cracked plastic case. The label was smeared, almost unreadable, but Boone's handwriting was clear enough. L.R. blank, interview, 2005. Naomi's pulse quickened. He interviewed someone, maybe a witness. Morales signaled for the tech officer. The cassette was slipped into a portable player. Static crackled. Then a shaky voice emerged, that of a young man. She was scared, kept saying she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to. A cop told her to stay quiet, or she'd disappear like the others. I don't want to talk more. Don't write my name." The tape clicked off. Silence filled the vault. Naomi's hands trembled. She saw something, and they silenced her. Morales set his jaw. "This connects Coleman, it has to." But before they could process more, the radio on Morales' shoulder barked alive. "Lieutenant, we've got movement upstairs. Officers loyal to Coleman are trying to secure the third floor. We're holding them, but it's getting heated." Naomi felt her stomach drop. Coleman wasn't waiting. He was already countering. Morales swore under his breath. "He's trying to shut us down before we get out." Naomi clutched the folder tighter. "Then we can't stay buried in here. We need this evidence safe." The team began packing quickly, sealing the Rhodes file and Boone's tape into a protective case. The tension in the room rose with every passing second. As they moved back toward the stairwell, Naomi caught a sound boots echoing where they shouldn't. She froze, signaling with her hand. Morales raised his weapon. The team went silent. From the shadows at the far end of the corridor, figures emerged. 2 uniformed officers, faces set, weapons drawn. Naomi recognized them, men who had served under Coleman for years. "Detective Carter," one of them said, his voice sharp. "Step away from the evidence. Orders from upstairs." Morales barked. "Stand down. Internal Affairs is in control here." The men didn't lower their guns. Their eyes flicked between Naomi and the case in her hands. Naomi's heart pounded. She could see it in their faces, the conflict, the fear, the loyalty twisted by Coleman's grip. She raised her voice, steady and clear. "You know what you're doing is wrong. Boone died chasing this truth. Do you want his blood on your hands too?" The words seemed to hang in the damp air. For a moment, the officers wavered, but then one tightened his grip. "Our orders are clear. Hand it over." Tension snapped. Morales moved first, barking commands, his team fanning out, rifles trained. Naomi pressed the evidence case to her chest. She didn't blink. For long seconds, the basement corridor was a powder keg. Then, as if by divine timing, McKenna's voice thundered through the radio. "All units, hold position. Deputy Chief Coleman is now officially under investigation. Do not interfere with internal affairs operations." That's an order. The 2 officers hesitated, their resolve crumbling. One lowered his weapon first, then the other, shame flickering in their eyes. Morales' men disarmed them swiftly, binding their hands. Naomi exhaled, knees nearly buckling. She held the case tighter, the weight of Lily Rhodes's lost voice pressing against her chest. But even as relief seeped in, Naomi knew this was only a reprieve. Coleman wasn't finished. He had men, power, and a lifetime of influence. He would not go quietly. She looked at Morales, her voice quiet but fierce. "We have the truth now. But the question is, can we get it out before Coleman buries us too?" Morales nodded grimly. "Then we don't stop moving." As they climbed the stairwell, Carrying the fragile weight of evidence and ghosts, Naomi felt Boone's presence like a hand on her shoulder. They had opened the first door to the truth. But behind it lay darker rooms still, and Coleman's shadow loomed over every step. And somewhere above, in the high offices of the Justice Center, Richard Coleman was already plotting his next move. The stairwell echoed with hurried footsteps as Naomi Carter and the SWAT team climbed toward the main floor. The case she carried felt heavier than stone, though it held only a thin file and a worn cassette. To Naomi, it carried the weight of Boone's ghost, of Lily Rhodes's vanished years, of every shadow Coleman had thrown across the department. When they emerged into the lobby, the atmosphere had shifted. The grand atrium of the Justice Center, usually a blur of clerks and attorneys, now thrummed with tension. Uniformed officers crowded the marble floor, some ushering civilians out, others clustering in groups that fell silent as Naomi passed. Conversations had turned into whispers, glances sharpened into accusations. Captain McKenna stood near the security desk, her phone pressed to her ear. She spoke in clipped tones, then hung up with a snap. Her face was pale, jaw clenched. "What happened?" Morales asked. "Coleman," McKenna said, her voice low. "He's moving faster than we thought. He's called the mayor directly, said Internal Affairs is overstepping its authority. Claims Carter is manufacturing evidence out of a personal vendetta." Naomi felt the words like a punch. She had expected Coleman to fight, but hearing her name twisted into a weapon still cut deep. McKenna's gaze shifted to Naomi. "The mayor's office wants an explanation, now." Before Naomi could speak, the glass doors at the far end burst open. Richard Coleman himself strode in, flanked by half a dozen officers. His presence filled the lobby, broad frame, silver hair, a smile that was more weapon than warmth. Applause once greeted that smile at banquets and press conferences. Today, it was a mask stretched tight over desperation. "Captain McKenna," he boomed, his voice carrying across the atrium, "what exactly is going on here? My building, my people, swarmed by SWAT without my authorization? And this?" His eyes flicked to Naomi, sharp as knives. "This detective, disgraced and discredited, parading around like she owns the truth?" The gathered officers shifted, some nodding subtly, others frowning. Coleman's words carried weight, the kind born of years at the top. Naomi tightened her grip on the case. "You set explosives in your own archive, Coleman. We disarmed them. Boone's file on Lily Rhodes survived, and it points straight to you." Coleman chuckled, a sound that dripped contempt. "Explosives? Missing girls from a decade ago? Captain, are you really entertaining this fantasy? Carter's been chasing ghosts since the day she walked into this department. Everyone knows it." McKenna's eyes narrowed. She didn't answer immediately. Naomi could feel the knife's-edge doubt spreading like a crack in glass. Coleman turned his gaze outward, to the circle of watching officers. "This is a witch hunt. Internal Affairs barges in on a Monday morning, armed to the teeth, based on the word of a woman who couldn't even keep her last investigation straight. And now you're disrupting the very heart of justice in this city." The murmur in the crowd grew. Naomi saw the divide, the younger patrolmen, uncertain whom to believe. The older ones, eyes flicking to Coleman with habitual deference. "Captain," Coleman pressed, his voice honeyed steel, "hand over that file. Let's end this circus before it destroys what little trust the public has left." The silence after his demand was suffocating. Naomi felt her pulse pound in her ears. She could almost hear Boone's voice urging her not to flinch. "Don't you, Dari," Naomi said, stepping forward. Her voice cracked through the stillness like a whip. "He killed Boone. He buried Lily Rhodes's case. And if you give him this file, he'll bury me next. Maybe all of you." Coleman's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. It was enough. Naomi saw the flicker, the fear behind the arrogance. McKenna caught it too. Her eyes snapped back to Naomi, searching, weighing. Then she raised her chin. "Deputy Chief Coleman, until further notice, you are relieved of command. Internal Affairs is assuming control of this building." The words cracked like thunder. Gasps rippled through the lobby. Coleman's face darkened, the smile vanishing like smoke. "You don't have the authority," he snarled. "I do when there's evidence of sabotage and attempted destruction of records," McKenna fired back. For a moment, it seemed Coleman might lunge forward. Instead, he turned sharply, his voice dropping to a growl. "You've made a mistake, Captain. All of you. And mistakes like this don't get forgotten." He pivoted and strode out, his entourage following. The heavy glass doors slammed shut behind him. The lobby exhaled as if a storm had passed, but Naomi knew better. This was no storm ending. It was only clouds gathering darker. Morales stepped close. He's not done. That man has allies everywhere. Naomi nodded, her fingers tightening on the case. Then we don't stop, we dig deeper. Boone died for this truth, Morales. Lily Rhodes deserves it. And if Coleman wants a war, he'll get one. McKenna studied Naomi for a long moment, then finally said, "We'll set up a secure room upstairs. That file doesn't leave our sight until we've copied every page. Carter, you'll brief me on everything Boone told you. No more surprises." Naomi exhaled slowly. Understood. But even as they moved toward the elevators, Naomi felt the unease settle deeper in her bones. Coleman wasn't retreating, he was regrouping. And somewhere in the city, Vince Russo would be sharpening his own knives, waiting for the signal to strike. The battle for the truth had only just begun. Upstairs in a secured conference room, the atmosphere was taut with urgency. The Rhodes file lay open on the table, its sparse pages spread like fragile bones. A tech officer hunched over a scanner, copying every page, every photograph, every faint scribble of Boone's handwriting. Naomi Carter sat at the edge of her chair, eyes tracking each detail as if afraid they might vanish again. Captain McKenna paced the length of the room, phone in hand, her voice clipped and deliberate as she updated a federal contact. Explosives confirmed. Yes, a missing persons case resurfaced. Coleman is implicated. We need backup jurisdiction. She ended the call, but her expression was grim. Washington wants everything documented before they move. They don't want to risk a political scandal without airtight evidence. Naomi clenched her fists. Every second we wait, Coleman's out there rewriting the narrative. He'll bury us before we get a chance to breathe. As if on cue, Morales's radio crackled. A patrol sergeant's voice came through, tight with unease. "Lieutenant, local news vans are already outside. They're reporting that Internal Affairs disrupted a normal inspection after a disgruntled detective made wild accusations. Coleman's already given a statement. He says Carter is unstable, that she falsified evidence." Naomi felt heat flush her face. That didn't take long. McKenna's jaw hardened. He's controlling the public first. That buys him sympathy, buys him time. Morales added quietly, and he's warning us. If he can spin the press this fast, he's got people feeding him every move we make. The realization was like ice down Naomi's spine. Coleman's reach wasn't just high, it was everywhere. Across the city, in a dimly lit restaurant on the west side, Richard Coleman sat opposite Vince Russo in a private booth. The air smelled of garlic and cigars, the low hum of conversation barely masking the edge in their voices. "You assured me it was handled," Russo hissed, stabbing a thick finger against the table. "Now Internal Affairs is crawling over your building, and the girl's file is still breathing." Coleman's face was stone. "Carter blindsided us, but it won't last. She's hanging by a thread. I've already discredited her with the press. By tomorrow, she'll be nothing but a cautionary tale about rogue cops." Russo leaned back, his gold chain glinting in the dim light. "Discrediting isn't enough. If that file reaches a federal judge, neither of us walks clean. You need to end this." Coleman's eyes flicked sharp. "I will. Carter's vulnerable. No family, few allies. I can make her disappear, and no one will question it. But we do this my way." Russo smirked. "Just make sure your way doesn't cost me business." They clinked glasses, the sound like a pack sealed in shadows. Back at the Justice Center, Naomi left the conference room for a breath of air. The hallways were too tight, the walls pressing in with whispers of doubt. She stepped into a stairwell, leaning against the cool railing, and pulled Boone's photo of Lily Rhodes from her pocket. The girl's smile was faint, blurred by time. Naomi whispered to herself, "I'll get you out of the dark, I promise." The stairwell door creaked. Naomi turned. A shadow moved at the landing below fast, deliberate. She caught the glint of metal before instinct threw her sideways. A blade slashed where she'd been standing, sparks scraping from the railing. Naomi kicked hard, sending the attacker stumbling. He wore no uniform, just dark clothes, a cap pulled low. His eyes burned with feral determination. He lunged again. Naomi blocked with her forearm, the knife grazing her coat sleeve. Pain shot through her arm, hot and sharp. Training took over. She grabbed his wrist, twisted, forced the knife free. It clattered down the stairs. He shoved her hard against the wall, breath hot and ragged. "Coleman says you don't walk out," he growled. Before Naomi could respond, the stairwell door banged open above. Morales's voice thundered, "Carter!" The attacker bolted, racing down the steps. Morales and two officers gave chase, boots pounding, but the man vanished into the warren of service corridors below. Naomi pressed a hand to her bleeding arm, adrenaline still surging. Morales rushed back, eyes scanning her wound. "You all right?" "I've been better," Naomi said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "But now we know Coleman's done playing chess. He's moved to knives." Morales' jaw tightened. "Then we lock this place down tighter. He won't get another chance." But Naomi wasn't so sure. Coleman's power didn't lie in brute force alone. It lived in whispers, in influence, in the cracks of trust that spread like rot. That night, as the Justice Center quieted under armed guard, Naomi sat alone in the evidence room, her wounded arm bandaged. The Rhodes file lay before her, its thin pages now digitized, its secrets copied. Yet the weight of them pressed heavier than ever. She thought of Boone's steady voice, of Lily's smile. She thought of the knife flashing in the stairwell, the voice that carried Coleman's order. And she knew this battle wasn't just about records or evidence. It was about survival, hers, McKenna's, and anyone who dared stand in the way of a man who had spent a lifetime learning how to bury truth beneath power. Outside, the city's lights flickered against the lake, indifferent to the war brewing in its heart, and Naomi Carter, alone with her ghosts, prepared for the long night ahead. Because Coleman had shown his hand, and he would not stop until hers was forced cold and still. Morning broke over Cleveland in shades of steel and ash. From the windows of the Justice Center, the lake looked like a flat blade catching the pale light. Naomi Carter stood with her arm bandaged, coffee cooling in her hand, watching the city stir awake. Sleep had been a luxury she hadn't tasted. Her thoughts circled the same point: Coleman wasn't finished. The failed attack in the stairwell was only a warning. Behind her, the conference room buzzed. Captain McKenna and Morales stood over the digitized Rhodes file. Pages flickered across the monitor, Boone's notes preserved now in glowing lines. Yet the more they studied, the more questions emerged. "It's thin," McKenna admitted, tapping the screen. "A photo, a cassette, Boone's handwriting. It points at Coleman, but it won't hold in court. Not against a man with his influence." Naomi set her cup down. "There's more." Boone hinted at a second cache, evidence he kept off the books. He said, "If I go down, the truth won't die with me." He left me a trail. I just never had the nerve to follow it until now. Morales leaned forward. "Where?" Naomi hesitated, then pulled a slip of paper from her notebook. Boone scrawled address, a storage unit on the outskirts of Parma. He rented it under a cousin's name. I think that's where he hid the rest. McKenna weighed the risk. If Coleman even suspects it exists, he'll have people watching. "Then we get there first," Naomi said. Across town, in a paneled office that smelled of leather and power, Coleman was already a step ahead. His phone buzzed with a secure message. "Unit in Parma confirmed. Carter moving soon." He allowed himself a tight smile. "Let her go," he told the caller. "We'll make the discovery for her. And when she walks into that unit, she'll find exactly what I want her to find." Russo lounged in a chair across the desk, smoke curling from his cigar. "You plan it yet?" Coleman's eyes gleamed. "Oh, it's planted. Enough counterfeit evidence to damn her twice over. When she brings it back, it'll look like she fabricated everything. By the time Internal Affairs realizes, the mayor, the press, the whole city will already believe Carter's nothing but a fraud." Russo chuckled darkly. "That's cleaner than a bullet. Reputation dies slower." Coleman's smile thinned. "And she'll take McKenna down with her. Then there's no one left in this department with teeth." Naomi drove the unmarked car herself, McKenna beside her, Morales in the back. The November sky hung low, spitting rain on the windshield. The storage facility sat off a cracked industrial road, chain-link fence topped with rusting barbed wire. She parked near Unit 4-2, Boone's supposed hiding place. Her chest tightened as she stepped out. The air smelled of damp concrete and old oil, the kind of scent that clings to forgotten places. "Carter," McKenna said quietly. "If Boone did leave something here, it could make or break us. But if Coleman knows—" "I know," Naomi replied. "But Boone trusted me. I have to see it through." They reached the unit. The lock looked untouched, its metal cold under Naomi's fingers. She turned the key Boone had left her years before. It fit too smoothly. Her instincts prickled. Inside, the unit was dim, dust motes hanging in the slant of light. Stacks of boxes lined the walls. Naomi's pulse quickened. Boone's handwriting scrawled on some of the lids. She knelt, pried one open. Inside lay files, photographs, even a reel of surveillance tape. Her breath caught. This is it. But as she pulled the first folder free, something felt wrong. The paper smelled faintly chemical, too new for something boxed years ago. Morales lifted another lid, frowning. These are staged, too clean. Naomi's stomach turned. She yanked a page closer, eyes scanning the type. It was a police report about herself. Allegations of falsifying evidence in past cases, a pattern of misconduct, notes suggesting she'd forged Boone's signature to cover her own mistakes. Her hands went cold. This isn't Boone's. It's Coleman's. McKenna's face darkened. He planted it. He knew we'd come. Even as she spoke, sirens wailed outside. Naomi's heart lurched. Through the slit of the door, she saw flashing lights. A half-dozen patrol cars boxed them in. The door burst open. Officers stormed in, weapons raised. Hands up now! Naomi froze, the false evidence still in her grasp. To any outsider, it looked damning. Detective Carter caught red-handed in a unit filled with manufactured files, painting her as a corrupt liar. McKenna stepped forward, voice sharp. This is internal affairs jurisdiction. Lower your weapons. But the sergeant leading the raid sneered. Mayor's orders, Captain. We've got a warrant. This whole operation is compromised. Morales whispered under his breath. It's a setup. He's burying us alive. Naomi's pulse roared in her ears. She saw Boone's ghost, Lily Rhodes' faded smile, and the knife in the stairwell all converging here. If they were taken now, everything would vanish. She raised her voice, steady despite the terror. You know me. You know Boone. You think he'd trust me with this if it wasn't real? Coleman is feeding you lies. Some of the officers hesitated, uncertainty flickering, but others kept their weapons trained, their loyalty to Coleman ironclad. McKenna leaned close to Naomi, her whisper fierce. We can't win this standoff. We need to get that real file to federal hands before Coleman's poison spreads. Naomi nodded, resolve hardening. Then we run, with the truth. And as the rain hammered harder on the tin roof of the storage facility, Naomi Carter braced herself for the narrow escape that could decide everything her life, Boone's legacy, and Lily Rhodes' justice. The storage unit had become a cage. The smell of damp cardboard and machine oil pressed down on the three of them as red and blue light pulsed through the narrow slats of the metal door. Dozens of boots shuffled just outside, orders barked over radios. Naomi Carter felt her pulse hammer in her throat, the forged reports Coleman planted still open on the floor in front of her. If they were hauled out now, every headline would tell the same story. Disgraced detective caught fabricating evidence. McKenna's voice was low but sharp. We don't have time to argue. Morales, options. Lieutenant Ethan Morales crouched near the back wall, running his hand along the concrete. These storage units have a service corridor, fire safety code. If it's not bricked up, we might have a way out. Naomi's eyes darted to the evidence case clutched against her chest, the real Rhodes file, Boone's cassette, fragile threads of truth in a storm of lies. If Coleman's men got their hands on this, Boone's fight would die a second time. A bullhorn boomed outside. This is Sergeant Kelly. Step out with your hands up, now. McKenna muttered. Kelly's been Coleman's lapdog for years. Naomi's mind raced. If they surrendered, the planted evidence would destroy them before they reached a federal judge. The trap was closing, just as Coleman had planned. Morales shoved aside a stack of boxes and grinned grimly. Here, access panel. Looks rusted but intact. The bullhorn barked again. You have 30 seconds before we come in. Naomi and McKenna helped wrench the panel loose. Dust rained down. Behind it, a narrow passage ran dark along the outer wall. Morales slid inside first, checking the space. It's tight, but it'll lead to the service lane. Move. Naomi went next, clutching the case. The metal scraped her coat, the air stale with rust. She crawled forward, heart pounding. Behind her, McKenna followed, pulling the panel shut just as the lock on the unit door snapped under force. Shouts erupted as officers stormed inside. Their boots thundered. Boxes crashed to the ground. But the service corridor swallowed Naomi and her allies into its dark throat. They emerged into the rain-soaked alley behind the facility. Patrol cars blocked the main gate, headlights glaring. Voices shouted on radios. Morales scanned fast. North side fence weak spot by the drainage ditch. Move. They sprinted, water splashing underfoot. The November air sliced at Naomi's lungs. Her arm throbbed from the stairwell attack, but adrenaline drove her forward. Behind them, flashlights cut through the rain, shouts closing in. McKenna muttered, Coleman won't let us walk out, not after this. Naomi tightened her grip on the case. Then we run faster. They reached the fence. Rust flaked under their hands. Morales hauled himself up first, yanking the wire wide. Go. Naomi shoved the case through, then scrambled after it, boots slipping on the slick metal. She dropped into the mud on the other side, McKenna right behind. Sirens wailed closer. A spotlight swept the alley. Down, Morales hissed. They flattened against the ditch wall as beams of light passed overhead. Patrol officers shouted, searching, their boots crunching gravel. Naomi pressed the case to her chest, mud soaking her coat. Her breath came in shallow gasps. The lies Coleman had staged sat like poison behind them, but the truth was still in her hands. For now, when the lights shifted, Morales led them along the ditch, ducking low until they reached a culvert that emptied into a storm drain. The stench was foul, the tunnel narrow, but it offered cover. They crawled inside, the sound of water echoing. Naomi's knees ached, her palms scraped raw against concrete, but she pushed forward. Boone's voice echoed in her memory. If I go down, the truth won't die with me. An hour later, mud-streaked and shivering, they surfaced blocks away in an abandoned lot. The city's skyline loomed through the drizzle, neon signs bleeding color into the wet night. Morales wiped his hands on his vest. We're clear for now. McKenna's face was pale, but resolute. Coleman will spin this before sunrise. We broke into a storage unit, resisted arrest, fled the scene. On paper, we look guilty. Naomi opened the case. Inside, Boone's cassette glistened faintly under the lot's flickering light. She touched it gently, as if it were Boone's own hand. This is all that matters. If we get this to federal investigators before Coleman smothers it, we have a chance. Morales scanned the street. Then we don't go back to the Justice Center. Too hot. We disappear until we're ready to drop this in the right hands. Naomi nodded, though the weight of what they'd lost pressed heavy. Boone's cash was gone twisted into Coleman's weapon against her, but the thin thread she carried could still unravel him. At that very moment, Coleman stood before a bank of microphones in City Hall. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned forward. His voice was measured, grave, perfectly calibrated for evening news. Earlier today, a small faction within Internal Affairs, led by Detective Naomi Carter, engaged in unauthorized operations that compromised public safety. They broke into private property, fabricated evidence, and endangered fellow officers. I want to be clear, the Cleveland Police Department does not tolerate rogue behavior. An internal review is already underway. Questions flew, flashes popped, but Coleman simply raised his hands in practiced humility. We are committed to transparency, and I assure the citizens of Cleveland, justice will not be hijacked by personal vendettas. Applause followed from allies planted among the crowd. The headline was already written, Carter, Rogue Cop. Back in the shadows of the city, Naomi leaned against the hood of the unmarked car Morales had stashed. Rain streaked her face, indistinguishable from tears she refused to shed. They'll believe him, she whispered. The city, the mayor, maybe even half the department, they'll all believe him. McKenna placed a firm hand on her shoulder. Then we don't fight for headlines. We fight for the truth. Quietly, patiently, until we have enough that even Coleman's power can't smother it. And Naomi closed her eyes, steadying her breath. She had nearly lost everything tonight, but she still held the file, still held Boone's voice on tape. That was enough to keep moving. She opened her eyes to the slick streets ahead. Then let's find the next thread, before he finds us first. And as the rain hammered Cleveland, Naomi Carter knew one truth above all. Coleman had set the snare, but she had slipped it. And now it was her turn to hunt. The city moved on as if nothing had happened. Morning commuters filled the buses, shopkeepers unlocked their doors, and the courthouse clock chimed its steady rhythm. But beneath Cleveland's routine beat, Detective Naomi Carter felt the tremor of war. Coleman owned the headlines, his face plastered on television screens, painting her as a rogue cop bent on revenge. If she showed herself openly, she risked arrest, or worse. She kept to the edges of the city, slipping through alleys and back roads with Morales and Captain McKenna. They had relocated to an abandoned safe house used once by narcotics detectives, its walls scarred with peeling paint, the air faintly scented with mildew and gun oil. It wasn't comfortable, but it was quiet. Naomi laid Boone's cassette on the table, beside the Rhodes file. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep, but her mind refused to still. This won't be enough, she said. Coleman's already poisoned the well. We need more, something undeniable. McKenna sank into a chair, her shoulders heavy. Boone must have known more than what he left us. People don't risk their lives for scraps. Morales leaned forward. Boone had contacts in the community, people who trusted him when they didn't trust anyone else. Maybe one of them still knows something. Naomi's gaze sharpened. There was a name in his notes. JT. No address, no details, just initials. Boone said JT saw Lily Rhodes the night she disappeared. McKenna raised an eyebrow. If he's still alive, he might be our only thread. Finding JT meant stepping into the underbelly Coleman pretended didn't exist. Morales tapped his connections in the neighborhood, asking quiet questions in bars where cops rarely lingered. Naomi followed the faint trail Boone had left, scraps of handwriting pointing to a stretch of East 55th where abandoned houses slumped like tired men. They found JT in a crumbling duplex, the blinds drawn tight, the smell of smoke thick in the air. He was older now, his hair gone gray, his hands unsteady. His eyes widened when he saw Naomi at the door. "You're Boone's girl," he said, voice rasping. Naomi swallowed hard. "I was his partner, yes, before he died." JT waved them inside, nerves twitching in his shoulders. He lowered himself into a worn chair, pulling a blanket tight. "I told him too much. That's why he ended up the way he did. Why you here now? Coleman's still breathing, ain't he?" Naomi sat across from him, leaning forward. "We know he buried Lily Rhodes' case. We know Boone died chasing it, but we don't have enough to prove it. If you know something, if you saw something, please. This is the only way it ends." JT's eyes flickered with fear. He tapped his fingers against the chair arm, a restless beat. It was a night like this, cold, wet. Lily came running down 71, scared half to death. Said she saw cops meeting with Russo's boys. She thought she was going to blow the whistle. Next day, she was gone. Naomi's chest tightened. "You're saying Coleman was there?" JT nodded, slow and deliberate. "Saw him with my own eyes. Suits don't blend easy with street crews. He told Russo he'd handle the girl. Boone knew. That's why they silenced him." McKenna drew in a sharp breath. Morales scribbled notes. Naomi felt her pulse surge. Here it was, the missing link Boone had chased to his grave. But JT's voice dropped to a whisper. "You tell this out loud, you won't make it to morning. Coleman owns the badge, owns the city. You're just one woman." Naomi's voice was steady. "One woman can still make him fall, but I need you, JT. Will you testify?" His eyes glistened with terror. He shook his head violently. "No court, no cameras. They'll put me in the ground before I open my mouth." Naomi didn't push further. She knew the grip of fear too well. Instead, she asked for a recording. JT hesitated, then nodded. Morales set up the mic on his phone. JT repeated his account, voice trembling but clear. When it ended, Naomi promised him protection, though in her gut she feared her promise was fragile. Back at the safe house, McKenna replayed the recording, her expression grim. "This is stronger, firsthand. But Coleman will call him a liar, a junkie, whatever suits the story. We need corroboration." Naomi's eyes drifted to the cassette tape again. Boone's voice still lingered on it. Interviews, fragments, warnings. She felt the ache of his absence like a wound that refused to heal. "We'll find more," she said. "Boone didn't die for nothing. Lily Rhodes didn't vanish into smoke. Someone else knows." Across town, Coleman listened to the same broadcast he had engineered the night before. Anchors repeating his words, headlines calling Carter reckless. But his aide entered with a worried look. "Sir, there are whispers Carter's alive, moving with McKenna and Morales. They're digging again." Coleman's jaw tightened. "Of course they are. Boone trained her too well." Russo, seated in the corner with his ever-present cigar, smirked. "You want me to handle it?" Coleman shook his head slowly. "Number? Not yet. If she's chasing ghosts, let her chase them. Because when she tries to show her hand, I'll be ready with the noose already tied." That night, Naomi lay awake on a cot in the safe house, listening to the rain tap against the broken window. She replayed JT's words in her mind, Boone's cassette in her pocket. Fear gnawed at her, but beneath it burned a deeper fire. Coleman thought she was cornered. He thought the city's doubt was enough to silence her. But she had seen the truth with her own eyes, heard it in the voices of those too afraid to speak. And she knew every empire of lies eventually cracked. She whispered to the empty room, as if Boone himself sat beside her, "I'll finish what you started." And outside, the city slept uneasily, its fate balanced on the thin line between Naomi Carter's resolve and Richard Coleman's ruthless grip. The safe house hummed with restless silence. Rainwater dripped from a leaky gutter, forming a steady rhythm on the cracked floor. Naomi Carter sat at the table, Boone's cassette and JT's recorded statement in front of her. She traced her fingers along the edge of the case, the weight of fragile hope pressing against her chest. McKenna stood near the boarded-up window, scanning the street below. Coleman's men are everywhere. Patrol units, detectives on his payroll. We can't stay hidden long. Morales adjusted the bandage on Naomi's arm. You need rest. You've been running on fumes since yesterday. Naomi shook her head. Rest can wait. Evidence doesn't. The door creaked suddenly. All three stiffened. Morales drew his sidearm, aiming at the shadow that stepped into the dim light. Easy, the man said, lifting his hands. His voice carried the gravel of years in uniform. Naomi blinked in surprise. It was Lieutenant Frank Donnelly, a veteran officer with more than 25 years in the department. Known for his silence, his refusal to get tangled in politics, Donnelly had long been seen as Coleman's neutral observer. What are you doing here? McKenna asked sharply. Donnelly shut the door behind him, rain dripping from his coat. His eyes, weary but steady, fixed on Naomi. I heard what Coleman said about you, and I knew it was a lie. Naomi frowned. Why believe me now, after all this time? Donnelly hesitated, then reached into his coat. He pulled out a thin file, edges yellowed with age. He set it on the table. Because I've been carrying this for years. I never had the guts to use it. Boone tried, and he paid the price. Maybe you're the one who can. Naomi opened the file. Inside were surveillance photos, grainy, black and white, but clear enough to show Coleman meeting with Russo outside a warehouse in 2005. Alongside them were reports Donnelly had written but never filed, describing unusual cash transfers and unexplained gaps in the evidence chain. Naomi's breath caught. Why didn't you speak up? Donnelly's jaw tightened. Because Coleman buried men for less. I had a family to feed. I told myself silence was safer. But when Boone died, and now seeing you take the same hits, I can't carry it anymore. For the first time in days, Naomi felt a flicker of relief. She looked him square in the eyes. Then stand with us. Because we're not just fighting Coleman, we're fighting the whole rotten system that lets him thrive. Donnelly gave a slow nod. I'm in. But across town, Coleman's patience snapped. In his office, he hurled a glass against the wall, shards scattering across polished wood. Russo leaned back in his chair, amused but wary. You're losing your cool, Richie. Coleman turned, his eyes blazing. Carter won't stop. She's gathering allies now. Donnelly's been sniffing around, don't think I don't know. If we don't crush them, they'll drag us into the light. Russo exhaled smoke. Then we crush them. The girl, the captain, Morales, Donnelly wiped the board clean. Coleman's voice dropped, cold as steel. Do it, but make it loud. Let the city see what happens when you go against me. Fear is stronger than any evidence. Russo's grin widened. Now you're talking my language. That night, the storm outside broke into sheets of rain. Naomi and her allies pored over the new file Donnelly had delivered, piecing it with Boone's cassette and JT's testimony. It was still thin, but the web was growing. McKenna tapped the table. If we can link these meetings to Lily Rhodes' disappearance, the whole story cracks open. But we need official eyes on it, federal eyes. The problem is getting it out of the city without Coleman intercepting. Naomi's reply was cut short by the sudden blast of gunfire. Bullets shattered the boarded window, spraying glass and splinters. Morales shoved Naomi to the ground, returning fire through the darkness. Move, he barked. The safe house erupted in chaos. Russo's men had found them dark figures advancing through the storm, weapons flashing. Naomi grabbed the evidence case, heart pounding, as McKenna pulled Donnelly toward the rear door. Morales covered them, his rifle cracking against the thunder. They burst into the alley, rain hammering their faces. Tires screeched at the far end, two black SUVs blocking the escape. Men spilled out, shouting, guns raised. Naomi froze for half a second. Then she saw it, the fire escape ladder hanging just above reach. Up, she yelled. McKenna boosted Naomi first, then scrambled after her. Donnelly, grunting with effort, hauled himself up as bullets sparked against the metal. Morales fired in short bursts, then leapt to grab the ladder, dragging it up behind him as the attackers closed in. They climbed to the rooftop, breath ragged, rain stinging their eyes. The city stretched out before them, slick streets, neon bleeding in the downpour, sirens wailing in the distance. Naomi clutched the case, her knuckles white. Below, Russo's men spread through the alley, searching, shouting. The safe house burned with gunfire, its windows flashing like angry eyes. McKenna pressed a hand to Naomi's shoulder. We can't stay in the city. He's tightened the net too much. If we want this evidence to live, we move underground. Naomi nodded, chest heaving. Then we vanish, but we don't stop, not until Coleman falls. And as lightning split the sky, the four of them, Carter, McKenna, Morales, and Donnelly, faded into the storm, fugitives carrying the fragile weight of truth against a man who had ruled Cleveland with shadows. The road out of Cleveland was slick with rain, headlights carving narrow tunnels through the fog. Naomi Carter gripped the steering wheel tight, Boone's evidence case wedged between her feet. In the back seat, Captain McKenna dozed lightly, her hands still curled near her holstered weapon, while Lieutenant Morales scanned the rear view for tails. Beside him, Frank Donnelly sat silent, eyes distant, the weight of years of silence pressing heavy on his shoulders. They didn't stop until the skyline was a faint smear behind them, the lake swallowed by mist. Morales directed them to a cabin 2 counties over an old safe retreat once used by narcotics investigators. It stood at the edge of a pine forest, roof sagging, porch creaking under the rain. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and old cigarettes, but it was quiet, far from Coleman's reach. Naomi set the evidence case on the table, lit by the glow of a single oil lamp. We can't just keep running, she said. Coleman owns the city, the press, half the badge. If we want to bring him down, we need more than scraps. We need a chain of evidence so strong it crushes him in his own fortress. McKenna rubbed her eyes. Boone started this trail. We follow every step he left unfinished. Donnelly opened his file again, spreading the old surveillance photos. Grainy though they were, they placed Coleman with Russo more than once. He tapped one with a thick finger. This warehouse, East 79th. I remember that night 2005. Boone asked me to back him up, but I froze. I never went. I should have. Naomi studied the photo. If the warehouse still exists, maybe something does too. Records, transaction logs, maybe even someone who worked there. Morales leaned back. I might know someone. A retired dock worker, Luis Ortega. He used to handle shipments around that area. If Coleman and Russo were moving things, Ortega would have seen it. Naomi nodded. Then he's our next step. Finding Ortega meant slipping through shadows. They drove separate cars, used burner phones Donnelly had stashed, never stayed in one place longer than a night. Each diner booth, each gas station felt like borrowed ground, eyes always scanning for Coleman's reach. Ortega lived in a trailer near the docks, the air thick with brine and diesel. His hands were still calloused, his frame bent but sturdy. When Naomi introduced herself and mentioned Boone, the man's face softened with sorrow. Boone was a good one, Ortega said. Didn't look away like the rest. He lit a cigarette, the flame flickering in the damp air. Yeah, I remember Coleman. Always came dressed too fine for the docks. Met Russo plenty. We all knew something dirty was moving through those warehouses. Naomi leaned forward. Do you remember Lily Rhodes? Ortega's eyes darkened. The girl? Yeah. Saw her once hanging around the lot. Looked scared. Couple days later, I asked Russo's boys about her. They just laughed, said she was taken care of. Naomi's stomach turned. She pulled out the recorder. Ortega hesitated, then nodded. His voice, rough and weary, poured into the device, recounting dates, places, faces. Another thread woven into their net. When he finished, Ortega crushed his cigarette and looked at Naomi. You finished what Boone started. Don't let that bastard bury her twice. Naomi gripped his hand firmly. I won't. Back at the cabin, they pieced Ortega's testimony with JT's account and Donnelly's photos. The web grew tighter, lines converging on Coleman like a noose. McKenna spread the evidence across the table, her voice steady. This is becoming undeniable. 2 independent witnesses, photos, Boone's cassette. We're building a case. Naomi's heart stirred with cautious hope. For the first time, she felt momentum. Yet fear lingered, a shadow across every page. Coleman would not sit idle while his empire cracked. And she was right. Across Cleveland, Coleman sat in his office. Russo sprawled across from him. A report lay open on the desk. Ortega's name circled in red. Coleman's fist slammed the wood. She's pulling every ghost out of the grave. Boone, JT, now Ortega. If she strings them together, even I can't bury it. Russo smirked, though his eyes gleamed dark. Then we cut the string, one by one. Coleman leaned forward, voice low. Dangerous. Do it. Make it loud. Fear keeps people quiet longer than money ever will. Ugh. Russo's grin widened. Consider it done. That night, Naomi sat outside the cabin, the forest whispering around her. She held Boone's cassette in her hand, listening again to the tremble in the witness's voice recorded years ago. She thought of Lily's faded photo, of Boone's laugh, of the blade that had nearly ended her in the stairwell. McKenna joined her, coat pulled tight. For a while they sat in silence, the night pressing close. "Why you?" McKenna asked softly. "Why did Boone trust you with this? He could have gone to anyone." Naomi stared into the darkness. "Because I was the only one too stubborn to quit. Boone saw that. Maybe he knew I'd either break or burn." McKenna's voice softened. "You haven't broken yet." Naomi managed a small, weary smile. "Number, and I won't. Not until Coleman's truth is on every desk in Washington." The night passed heavy, but by dawn, the plan was clear. They would track down every name Boone had touched, every shadow he'd left in his notes. Piece by piece, they would weave the net. And when it was strong enough, they would pull dragging Coleman and Russo into the light. But they also knew this. Every step closer to the truth would bring the storm harder against them. And in Cleveland, as dawn broke over the steel-gray lake, Coleman had already unleashed Russo's men into the streets. The hunt was no longer quiet. It was war. Cleveland wore the storm like a bruise. Clouds pressed low, wind off Lake Erie whipped cold against the Justice Center complex, and every window glowed like an unblinking eye. On the news, Richard Coleman still smiled, polished, promising order and discipline. But on the streets, in diners and squad cars and churches, the whispers told another story. People felt something breaking, even if they didn't yet know where the crack had started. Inside a cabin miles from the city, Naomi Carter and her allies gathered around a battered table. Boone's cassette sat in the center, scratched and worn but stubbornly alive. JT's testimony lived on Morales' phone, Ortega's words echoed from a handheld recorder, and Donnelly's grainy surveillance photos showed Coleman meeting Vince Russo in the shadows of a warehouse. Not much, maybe, but when laid together, it looked like the skeleton of a truth big enough to tear down an empire. McKenna leaned forward, hands flat, voice clipped like she was briefing a tactical squad. "We need 3 strikes all at once. Internal broadcast to every monitor in the Justice Center, external dump to the press and federal servers, and a physical handoff to a federal judge who still has a spine. Coleman can smother one fire. He can't smother them all." Morales traced floor plans from memory on a paper bag, the kind of map built from years of patrols and raids. "Service dock gets us in, stairs by the archives, cut-through corridor no one uses, up to comms hub. It'll be guarded, but if we move like we belong, we might beat them." Donnelly shook his head slowly. "Coleman knows we're coming. He'll have men at the choke points, and Russo will have his shooters close. You go in, you're fighting outnumbered." Naomi lifted Boone's cassette, thumb resting on the wheel. "Then we fight. Boone died chasing this. Lily Rhodes disappeared because of this. We can't leave it buried." End of quote. The room fell into silence, heavy but resolute. Outside, rain lashed the trees like a drumbeat. They slipped back into Cleveland after midnight, 2 unmarked cars weaving through streets slick with rain. The Justice Center loomed ahead, its glass facade reflecting the red pulse of traffic lights. Naomi stared at it, a place she had spent half her life defending, now the fortress she had to storm. At the loading dock, Morales timed their entry with a guard's smoke break. The service door groaned but gave. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee. The building's hum wrapped around them. Vending machines, old pipes, distant voices. Naomi's chest tightened. She had walked these halls for years, but tonight every corner felt foreign, as if the walls themselves waited to see who would win. They reached the stairwell. Voices floated up, 2 of Coleman's loyalists. McKenna flashed a signal, guiding them down a maintenance corridor lined with peeling paint and mop buckets. They moved quietly, boots soft on the tile. At a vending alcove, Donnelly found the narrow passage Morales had promised, and they pressed forward. But luck turned, as it often does. A young officer rounded the corner, head bent to his phone. He looked up and froze, eyes widening. Recognition flickered. Naomi, McKenna, Morales, Donnelly. "Wanted," whispered about, "dangerous." His mouth opened. "Hey, they're—" Morales moved fast, catching the kid's wrist, guiding him down before the radio could reach his lips. Donnelly cuffed him gently, stashing him in a janitor's closet. "Sorry, son," he muttered. "You'll thank us when you're older." The clock they couldn't see started ticking faster. They reached the archive level. Naomi felt her breath shorten. The last time she had stood here, wires dangled from a patched door, a bomb waiting to erase the truth. Now the walls looked freshly painted, scrubbed clean, but she knew better. Buildings remember. And then the shadows peeled away. Russo stepped into the light first, grin wide and hollow, 6 armed men flanking him. Well, look at this, the runaway detective and her choir. Put the guns down, Russo, McKenna snapped. Russo laughed, the sound bouncing off concrete. You came here to finish this in Coleman's house? Then let's finish it. The hallway exploded with sound. Gunfire barked, sharp and deafening. Muzzle flashes lit plaster dust. Morales dropped to a knee, returning fire. Donnelly shoved a man into the wall, fist and pistol working as one. McKenna covered the flank, burst precise and controlled. Naomi clutched the evidence case, heart pounding. McKenna shoved the transmitter into her hands. Go! Get the feed online. We'll hold them. Naomi ran. Not a way forward, boots pounded tile, the case thudding against her ribs. Every step felt like a lifetime. She burst through the door of the communications hub, slammed it shut, jammed a chair under the handle. Machines hummed in the dark. Her hands shook as she connected Boone's cassette to Morales' jury-rigged transmitter. Please, she whispered, let this work. She pressed play. Boone's voice filled the room, calm, steady. The voice of a man you believed when nothing else deserved it. If you're hearing this, I didn't make it. Coleman's been with Russo for years. Lily Rhodes saw it. Now she's gone too. Naomi routed it through the system. Lights blinked. Across the building, monitors flickered alive. Officers froze in break rooms, squad rooms, even the lobby. Boone's words filled the air. She cued the next files, JT's broken voice, Ortega's weary account, Donnelly's old photos flashing grainy but undeniable. The laptop pushed the files outward too, to reporters' inboxes, to a federal clerk, to servers far from Coleman's reach. The progress bar crawled. Naomi held her breath. The door shook under a heavy blow. Russo's men shouted outside. A bullet cracked the frame, splinters stinging her face. Naomi pressed herself over the laptop, shielding it with her body. Come on, she begged. The bar reached the end. A chime, upload complete. She slumped in relief. The truth was everywhere now. The door burst open. Donnelly shoved inside, shoulder bleeding, dragging Naomi back. McKenna followed, face streaked with dust, firing controlled bursts down the hall. Morales stumbled in, rifle up, blood seeping through his sleeve. Naomi clutched the laptop, gasping. It's done. Everyone has it. Across Cleveland, officers stared at their monitors. Clerks dropped phones. Sergeants sat hard in chairs. Boone's voice rolled over them, a dead man's testimony refusing to be buried. Photos of Coleman with Russo filled screens. JT's words echoed in squad cars. Ortega's voice carried across precincts. And at the top of the building, Richard Coleman froze before his monitors. His smile cracked. 3 screens showed 3 betrayals. The news anchor's shocked face as files poured in, the internal system streaming his secrets, the federal email pinging on his desk. Shut it down, he barked. But the IT chief only shook her head. It's everywhere, sir, we can't. The walls of his empire groaned. Back in the archive hall, Russo's men faltered. Officers poured in from both ends, but this time, they weren't on his side. They had seen the broadcast. Confusion turned to fury. Rifles lifted, not at Naomi, but at Russo. Russo cursed, retreating as his thugs broke. The tide turned in a blink. Morales dragged Naomi close, his voice tight but proud. You bought us the seconds. Now the city knows. Naomi's knees shook, but she stood tall, clutching Boone's cassette. For the first time in weeks, hope pierced the fog. The truth had made it out. Coleman wasn't finished, men like him never surrendered. But for the first time, his fortress had cracked. And Naomi Carter, soaked in rain and plaster dust, stood in the ruins knowing this. Boone's fight had not been in vain. Lily Rhodes's smile had not been lost. The reckoning had begun. Morning came gray and cold over Cleveland. The storm had passed, but the streets still shone wet, littered with leaves and last night's debris. Outside the Justice Center, reporters crowded behind barricades, microphones raised, cameras rolling. Inside, the empire Richard Coleman had built for decades was unraveling in real time. He sat in his office, face pale, hair damp with sweat. Around him, the walls that once carried authority now closed in like prison bars. His phone rang endlessly, lawyers, allies, the mayor's office, but every call sounded the same. They saw the broadcast. The evidence is everywhere. There's nothing we can do. Coleman's jaw clenched as officers entered, not with salutes, but with warrants. Donnelly was among them, standing straighter than Naomi had ever seen him. For a moment, Coleman tried the smile, the charm that had carried him through scandals before, but it slid off his face when no one returned it. "You think you're saving the department?" He spat, voice shaking. "You're destroying it." "No," Donnelly said quietly. "You destroyed it. We're just cleaning up." They cuffed him then. Richard Coleman, deputy chief, the man who thought himself untouchable, let out past cameras that devoured every second. Reporters shouted his name, questions hurled like stones. He kept his eyes down. Downstairs, Naomi stood in the lobby with McKenna and Morales. Her arm still ached, her body carried bruises, but she stood tall, the evidence case clutched like a relic. Officers passed by, some nodding in respect, others looking away in shame. She didn't need their applause. The truth was enough. McKenna touched her shoulder. "You did it, Carter. Boone would have been proud." Naomi swallowed hard, her throat tight. She looked at the photo of Lily Rhodes taped to the case. This wasn't just Boone, or me. Lily's smile deserved to live past fear. Now it will. Morales gave a rare, small smile. And Coleman? He'll spend the rest of his life explaining his lies to bars and walls. Naomi let the words settle. Justice never felt as clean as the books promised. Boone was still gone. Lily Rhodes was still just a memory. But the darkness Coleman had wrapped around them had been pierced. And that mattered. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the lake, Naomi walked alone to the memorial wall outside the Justice Center. Names etched in stone stretched across the granite. She laid her hand against one, Sergeant Harold Boone. "I kept my promise," she whispered. "The truth didn't die with you." The wind off the water carried the scent of rain and steel. She stood there for a long time, letting the quiet fill her, until footsteps approached. McKenna and Morales joined her on either side, silent. Donnelly came last, hands in his pockets, eyes wet but steady. They didn't need words. Some battles leave silence, as the only fitting hymn. Weeks later, the story still ran on every channel. Coleman indicted, Russo charged. Old cases reopened. Families of the forgotten stepping forward with hope they thought long gone. Naomi's name came up often, sometimes praised, sometimes doubted, but she never sought the spotlight. One evening, McKenna found her at a quiet diner, nursing coffee, staring out at the street. "People will remember you for this," McKenna said. Naomi shook her head. "If they remember Boone, if they remember Lily, that's enough. One person doesn't save the world, but one person refusing to back down, sometimes that's all it takes to turn the tide." The camera crews eventually left. The noise of scandal faded into the ordinary hum of city life. But among those who had seen it, who had heard Boone's voice spill across the monitors that night, the lesson stayed. Truth can be buried, beaten, mocked, but when even one person stands in its defense, refusing to move, it can outlast every lie. And Naomi Carter, once dismissed as reckless, would be remembered not for the wounds she carried, but for the morning she stood still against the storm, and for the night she gave a city back its conscience. My dear friends, if you've stayed with me until the very last moments, surely your heart has gone through a whirlwind of emotions. Surprise, anger, compassion, even a lump in your throat at the choice made by the black female police officer. What do you think about her action? Was it admirable courage or a risky recklessness? If you were in her place, what would you do? Leave your comment below. If you believe that justice must be protected by the truth, press 1. If you feel there are still mysteries left unsolved, press 0. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you too will always stand on the side of justice, even though the path to the truth is never easy.